So hello everyone and welcome on our July meetup. It is fantastic to have Jutta joining us today from Germany. I'm just going to share my screen very quickly. Here we go. So in the series of Friends from Around the World, we have today Jutta joining us from Germany, and I'm going to bastardize the name, the name of the city, but it is between Berlin. You said it earlier, and I totally bastardized
Braunschweig, it is.
Right. Okay.
Braunschweig.
Braunschweig. Okay, so it's like Brunswick. She said. So for Canadians or British, it's like Brunswick. So Jutta is the mastermind behind Bossa Nova, and it is something that I have heard for a couple of years or longer, and I've always been more curious about it. I know that you have been trying to evolve this framework, this method, this way of thinking, and in the series of bringing friends from around the world, I said, well, why not bringing Jutta? And she will tell us exactly what we want to hear about this, especially using it around creating learning organizations, because this is one of the things that we are all struggling these days. I don't want to take too much time, so thank you to everyone that is joining us and to the new friends that joined our meetup. Welcome to the friends that have been with us for a long time. Thank you for staying with us. And I'm going to pass this. I'm going to pass it to Jutta to take the stage, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Ari. Thank you also for inviting me. This is really exciting. I'm looking forward to it. And when I talked about this with Ari beforehand, so we said like we both like the conversations and dialogues and discussions most afterwards. So I really try to make it short. I can't really promise. I know that I'm not always doing a good job here. So yeah, you know what I want to speak about. So it's about learning organizations and with Bossa Nova. And the first question, well, you always should start with why, right? So why are we talking about this? Why is this important and so on? And the why is something, well, you have seen that more often, I'm sure. So the why is the VUCA world we are living in. And what I think is really good about the pandemic is that finally people understand what VUCA really means. I think people, like most of us here in the meetup, we have been talking about VUCA for years and years, but always it seems people didn't really understand. But now if we think about, well, companies have taken endless amount of time to finish by the end of 2019 their budgets for 2020, but at latest in March they had to realize it was a waste of time because of that VUCA situation, the pandemic everyone put in, right? And so this is now, speaking of VUCA, it's much easier to grasp what it really means, because the pandemic was maybe too much an extreme. However, we all see that in various areas, but the pandemic also was something, well, it's the pun. It really happened to everyone. And so also everyone understands it. Now, the thing is, how do we deal with this? So one way is dealing with this by looking at how can we learn to live with a challenge like this, like the pandemic, like the VUCA world. And that's why the learning organization comes in. So what can we do as an organization in order to deal with that? The other way of thinking about this, what can we do about this is, well, maybe as companies, we really need to be more agile. And agile here, I mean, really in the literal sense. So we need to be flexible, adaptive, responsive, fast, nimble, all of that, so we can really address that VUCA challenge. Now, well, I mentioned already all the literal definition of agile, and just to be clear here, so being agile for addressing that change, it doesn't mean implementing Scrum, for example, all over the place. So Scrum is not the hammer and everything else is a nail here. It's actually thinking of an agile organization is more about thinking beyond agile, and without losing what we have with agile, but it's just not really enough. It needs to the beyond part. Now, one way of looking beyond is the bossa nova, and the bossa nova is made up of these 4 different streams, and those 4 different streams really look at a company from different perspectives. So the B stands for beyond budgeting, and really considers like, okay, if we fix a budget a year in advance, how agile can we still be? Well, not much so, right? Because it's then more rather controlled against the budget that's set out at the beginning of the year than anything that allows us to be flexible. Now, for open space, there are various ways how I look at this, but let's try to make it short because I kind of promised that. One way of looking at it is often in companies, we come up with a job description and then we look for somebody who fits that job description. And the way I look at it is really taking that somebody and put that person in that box, which is defined by the job description. What we should do instead, have a standing invitation so that every person can really live to their full potential, which also means we can be way more innovative, which is what we really mean in this need in this VUCA world. Now, moving on to the next S with the sociocracy, this really looks more into how is power maybe slowing us down. So if you think of how often decisions are made and how the power is structured, which is very often centralized, then it just means we are too slow for making decisions. So we need to really, really empower everyone and build a structure that allows us to do that. And so Sociocracy has various means for that. And then there's the A for agile. And now I wonder, something is in the chat. I think I will go to the chat later. And just at this point, I think like that.
Yeah.
Is that fine? Then what you also see here is the Nova, which means actually those 4 streams that you see here, they all provide a different perspective, but it's not the end of the world. There is more stuff out there and you have to keep your eyes open what's all out there that can help you in your context. So Bossa Nova, if you will, is also more or less a start to look at what an agile company is, what do you need to consider and look at, and then keep going. And again, the challenge we are facing right now, the VUCA, I also started off, well, it also requires companies to learn. Now let's look at that. So learning organizations is really an old thing. So Peter Senge mainly is the one standing for it. In the 90s, he said, like, learning organizations are organizations that encourage adaptive and generative learning, encourage their employees to think outside the box and to work in conjunction with other employees to find the best answer to any problem. Actually, there are several definitions. I also like the definition you used, Adi, when announcing this session. So, but this is also one. And I want to give you an example what this can mean in a Bossa Nova context. And the example I want to give is this one. That's from a company, actually a German one, not a British pound one, a German company, Mayflower, which is really well settled in Agile, so they offer Agile stuff, also to run projects, all of that. And there was a time where the employees, or at least some employees, said, well, actually the way how we decide on salaries and bonuses doesn't seem super Agile to us. And the reason was, it was done the way they, like almost everyone does it, right? It's kind of a classic. A boss says, well, you do like this, and maybe we have a conversation, the two of us, but well, that's it. And so they said, well, we really want to try something else. And think of Sengi's definition. Maybe I should go back just a second. So encourage adaptive generative learning, encourage their employees to think outside the box, and also allow them to find the best answer to any problem. So here's the problem. That's what happened next. So what happened next was, there was a bunch of the employees, I'm not sure, like 5 to 7 or so, and they said, well, we really want to try something else. And the first thing that they tried was, they just made like their salaries transparent amongst themselves, which is actually, in Germany, this is a huge thing. It is really not what people do.
It's almost not legal.
Yeah, almost. That's true. Yeah, it's probably very much embedded in the culture. We are not speaking about that. It's kind of a no-no. However, they did that, and this opened up for them a completely new dialogue and conversation, and so that was helpful to them. And then they decided, oh, what about if we just make this transparent to the rest of the company? So just those 5, 7 people. And they did. And at first it was like, what's happening here? A shock. But then more and more people followed that path, and they did this. And just by doing that, then people starting about talking about it. What can we actually do to make this maybe more fair and also more transparent, and transparent in the sense of that we understand why somebody gets this and somebody that. And then over time, so they experimented with several things, and they came up with one way, which is actually, I would think it's still a snapshot, the way that I know about, because they keep changing and improving and all of that. So, but what I know what they are doing, they have one elected person that takes part in all salary discussions. So it's kind of a salary representative or so. Then before anything gets started, it's the management says, okay, this is the money we are having. Now, maybe it can be like about salary increases or bonuses also, if you look at that. So what does the budget allow us to do actually, so that there's transparency about that. Then what's also known to the people is a set of values defined by the company. So like, well, we want to see the employees also support their peers. We want them to help, of course, the customers to be successful. We want, I don't know, like ensuring that the team pulls together and all of that. So they have their values, what they think it's important. And this is kind of the alignment that's there. And then there is the salary discussion where, well, every person who will be discussed about brings 2 other peers, whoever that person thinks are important. Then there's the rep and the manager or boss of that person. And then they first start kind of with an open dialogue. And then they also, it's kind of like a planning poker thing. Then everyone individually writes down what they think would be appropriate. And then they talk about this in another round, and then they agree on like what they suggest. Now, this is done like with everyone. And in the end, they look at, okay, does this really fit the budget that we are having or not? And if not, then it's adjusted in proportionally, either increased or reduced. So this is what they are doing. And it started again, just with a few individuals seeing this problem, and the company also encouraging them. Again, I want to remind you of what Sengi said, what a learning organization does, but maybe also keeping Bossa Nova in mind here. And perhaps having said that, diving a bit more into Bossa Nova, what this means from Bossa Nova perspective is whatever you do in terms of experiments like that, you're guided by 4 values. And the 4 values are transparency, which was what they did at the first thing there. So making it transparent, then self-organization, exactly what happened there. Continuous learning, this is also how they kept changing their process, and they still do that. And then it has to be aligned also on the customer, because but that's one of the core values in the discussions. Are the employees really helping all of us being successful, making the customer successful here? And looking at these 4 values, the Bossa Nova values, which are directly derived from the Agile Manifesto, by the way, they also have a more in-depth definition, like transparency says, create transparency for all involved in 2 directions by providing information and lowering the barriers to those seeking information. So it's not only saying transparency means all the time, make everything that's out there transparent to everyone. It means like, okay, especially if I need information, I have no problems getting the information. And also, if I have information, I don't use this for, well, any kind of power games. I make this transparent to especially to the people who need that. Then self-organization says use accountable cross-function teams that select themselves and follow their passion with responsibility. Also loads of examples what companies are doing in this section, but probably what most of you are aware of, something like self-selecting teams. It could be something that you want to do there. Continuous learning, always learn and contribute to others' learning, get feedback and adapt. And then we have constant customer focus right on every aspect of the company, product and process, structure and strategy, and individuals' contributions and people, which means everything that we are doing or that's happening, we know how it's aligned to us working with our customers. So there is a reason for why we are doing what we are doing. So these are the 4 values that are driving Bossa Nova, but in the same way, they're also driving to become a learning organization. And there's maybe one more thing that I really want to share before, maybe I'm really good here, before we can go into the discussion, which is how did you do that? And the how actually should have been shown or kind of being transparent from that example from Mayflower, yet I really want to bring it home. So how all that stuff is starting is you start by reflecting on the situation you are in. So it was those people who said, well, we think that's not really agile, how we decide on salaries and bonuses and all of that. So this is something we really think should be different. What they do next is which is kind of a result of the reflection, they come up with a hypothesis, what kind of probe, or if you will, for now, experiment would help to overcome what they found out here. So the reflection drives, first of all, an hypothesis that we might have on something. Then we come up with like, okay, what do we want to try here? And how can we also measure that it really makes a difference? And if our hypothesis is really true or not. And then next thing, well, obviously we run the experiment and then we reflect again. And then there is this outer circle that's too often forgotten. I assume the inner circle sounds very agile to you anyways, and it's kind of what we do for retrospectives or maybe even a sprint or anything like this. And that's, there's at least some relation. However, what we not so often do, and I think this is super important, publishing to our peers. So if Mayflower wouldn't have talked about that I wouldn't be able to tell you what they did with coming up with their decisions on bonuses and salaries. And I think we are now, speaking of especially software, I think we are pretty good to share what we learned technically, but we are not so good overall. And this is not necessarily software now, what we learned in terms of organizational design and what kind of experiments or probes we tried there.
Yeah.
And what worked for us in which context, and therefore what might someone else want to try, so they can also overcome the challenge they're facing.
Mm-hmm.
So back to Sengi. Sengi says also, a learning organization is a group of people who are continually enhancing their capabilities to create what they want to create. And this is, if you will, now jumping back here, this is for me, this kind of loop, this circle, where you continuously enhance your capabilities and you create stuff, what you feel based on your reflection is important to keep creating. And that's why I think Bossa Nova is at least one good way, and I know there are others out there, to implement a learning organization. And with that, I open the floor for discussions and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And want to thank you so far. And yeah.
How about Mario? You have some questions. Do you want to just chat with Jutta here, rather than me reading the questions?
Actually, just one. It's about what does it mean that they agree on the salaries and bonuses. I actually attended many meetups by the Mayflower guys. They have their own group and they discuss about these topics openly. But I'd like to understand, what does they agree on the salaries at the end of the process mean?
Mm-hmm. So they actually really, they share what they have written up secretly, providing rationale, and then as a group come up with a joint suggestion. And I have never been there, but the way I would do that is really in what I learned from sociocracy, using a consent decision. And the way this is working is like everyone comes up with their idea, so suggesting whatever the salary should be, and then the facilitator, which is just one person, so it's not a facilitator as we know a facilitator in kind of, I don't know, even in retrospectives, where I think it's a neutral person, shouldn't be at the same time a participant. Here it's just the opposite, it's definitely a participant. Saying based off the rationale, I suggest this and that salary. From what I heard, are there any objections? And then there you go round, and if people have an objection, then they say what it is. And the objection very often shouldn't be like, well, I don't like it, but again, bringing your rationale to it. Yeah.
All right, so if I understand correctly, this only works if there is a sociocracy set up and the organization is comfortable with it, because this kind of discussions can, I don't see them working outside of a sociocracy. Is pretty special. It requires a lot of maturity.
Yeah, well, but how I started was, I've never been part of that, so I don't know if they really use exactly this. But I would use a sociocratic decision-making process for that, but I cannot really say for sure that this is what they're doing. And I see your additional question. They are a German company. They are actually at least all over Germany. So I'm not sure if Hessen is their first headquarter. I thought it's in Bavaria, but I'm not sure. So they are all over the place.
Mm-hmm. How about next is Uvin and then Mara? Uvin had the first question.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Jutta. So yeah, my question was the final step with regards to sharing your process with your peers, and I assume this is sort of other areas within the organization who you work with, like although the intent might be a good intent, do you think in mass, if you were to mass produce this sort of way of working, it would create a culture of just copy pasting, which is what we see in a lot of organizations whenever they try to adopt agile or certain framework?
You mean kind of like Spotify model or something like
That
that?
and etc, right? Like they sort of, you know,
Yeah.
don't do the work to understand the problem or understand the context behind it. So they have a high level problem, and the moment they realize, oh, you know what, so and so built a solution for a similar problem, let's try it out.
Let me, so that could happen. That could definitely happen. And I still would like to share my screen again. So the main way how we would like to see that, and we see this in some cases, but not in all cases. We would like to see this really shared as what we call a probe. And the probe comes with the title that you have here. So this is what it's all about. So this is not directly the Mayflower, but it's very close. And then there is a background, which is kind of the core of your reflection, your hypothesis, and your experiment that also says how you want to measure it before and after, and maybe also kind of what you do once your hypothesis has been validated and how you want to broaden it in the company. So the one thing is, we have already collected, I don't know, 20 something of those probes, and they are in our book also published. We also have run some workshops where we did like a mining of probes, and together with actually the ones that are in the book, they are all also open on our website, the agilebossanova.org. So it's also there, you can find them. So this is one way what I really like, because it makes clear, and this is an abbreviated way, by the way, it makes clear what was your context by showing your background and what's your hypothesis. Now, whenever I work with people from a company and we are looking at what kind of problem and coming up with perhaps a probe, what can be done there, then they first look at what's out there, but then always, I've never seen it differently. They said, well, but this is not exactly what it is for us. And so they start really right away to come up with something different. However, it seems to be helpful to have this as an inspiration. So this is kind of one answer. And another answer, which is also something that I really am a huge fan of, is the experience reports from the Agile Alliance. This is a wealth of information where people share stuff. They do it in a different way. It's more like it's an experience report. It's more like free text and prose and so on. But it's amazing what you can find there. This is also great. And of course, it still can happen. I just last week had a really strange discussion on like the Spotify model. So that has been copied to somewhere where it just didn't work for reasons. And again, the model doesn't exist anyway. Yeah. So I'm not sure if it's a good answer, but the thing is, I have one more answer. What I've also seen is, because a good friend of mine, also a colleague of mine, is working for Ericsson, and they publish this in a very similar format than those probes, just on the intranet, which is already good. It is great, because also, especially for these big corporations, people often don't know what has been tried where and how does it help. And so they have this really huge searchable database where people can look for stuff. So yeah, not sure. It's probably not well, there's no really right answer or super good answer, but there something is happening, and probably still we will have that problem.
You gotta take a chance on human beings.
Yeah, yeah.
Dustin made a funny comment, funny and true, that they are copying the answer, not the question. So it's
That is exactly, that's why I started off why I like those probes, because they have the reflection plus the hypothesis there. So the background information and the hypothesis. And I believe this is actually always the point when people read this, then they say, well, but it's different. Well, and I guess we also all have heard that people often say, well, but this will never work for us because we are so different.
We're special.
Exactly. So here you go. Excellent. So what's your hypothesis then?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean it comes naturally. And thank you, Adam, for sharing the link to an experience report here, so people can find experience reports. That's great.
All right, Mara, you are next.
It occurred to me when you're talking, Jutta, when we work with agile companies that want to go agile, in quotes, yeah, often they don't know why. They don't know why they want to go agile. It's because the other guy, competitor, is doing it, not because of any other reason they understand. And so yes, one thing that occurs to me, it's not really a question, it's more of a comment, maybe others can comment on what you think, is it sounds like for this to work, this Bossa Nova, there's a prerequisite that the organization wants to become a learning organization. I don't think that's an assumption you can make. The organization I'm working with right now, learning actually has been one of the hardest things to have as a continuous. Teams want to do it, but they're just forced to just go and deliver and not stop and reflect.
I'm not sure if I really agree, and it could be that this is, well, at least a good prerequisite. Yet I think the really core prerequisite is more what's in the VUCA. So that as a company, we see, well, we cannot keep doing stuff the way we are doing it. We will run out of business if we keep doing it, and we are paying a price already for it. And it can be in various ways. If only, and the only is really in quotes here, that it's hard to find and keep talent. That could be already one thing, but it's really, and that's also my experience, that most often a change happens when people realize the pain. So it's not so much, which is maybe sad, but it's not so much seeing all the glory ahead of us, that it would be so cool and we really want to reach that. It's more what we feel right now, and that the thing we feel right now doesn't feel good, and therefore we want to get a different feeling. Make sense?
Adam has his hand raised. Adam, do you want to bring us into your report, or do you have a question? And you're on mute.
Oh,
okay. Anyone else has any question or want to?
Oh, there it goes. All right, sorry.
Okay.
Plugging back into my dock. So I kind of building on what Mara's question was, right? I think, and someone else's question earlier, right? There's this separation between, we have two conversations here. There's the conversation of, how do you get people to want to do this change? versus those that have decided that this is the journey they want to go on, but how?
Mhm.
Right. And so what I came here wanting to learn more about today was, all right, presuming that they've made this decision, what is unique to Bossa Nova versus other things out there? And I know one of the things that attracted me, besides the fact that I've had the pleasure of speaking with Jutta before, is you know, the sociocracy part of it, which is new to me. Open space is not. And so just the synthesizing of what this is. So I think Mayflower is an interesting example. I guess, do others, including Jutta, have other examples that we could talk about that maybe aren't about salaries too? Because I think people get hung up on the salary conversation.
No, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, I think Utah has had brought a good example, but I remember reading what is the organizations? They're reinventing organizations. There are plenty of examples in that book that are around how to bring these collective ideas on running a company and improving the company in different things, not just salary, to your point, but it's also, I forgot now, is a CEO in US, and he actually did something where he opened up and he allowed people in his company, Adam something, and he allowed the people in the company to decide on the focus, on how much to work, to come to work or stay at home or work wherever they want to work, which fits now with the plans for going back to work that organizations are having. And his company is doing great, right? He doesn't see any issue on the revenue, because the worry there is revenues, and if people don't, if you allow people to do anything they want, they're not going to work and all of that.
Yeah. Well, there are really a lot of examples. One example that I also like because it's so simple is what I know from a bank where the board of directors figured that, well, they kind of figured, yeah, that the communication isn't really good, the way they work together and collaborate in their board of directors meetings. And then they had this hypothesis, what happens if we remove the table so that this is not as a barrier between us anymore? And so they did. And the interesting thing was not only that really people didn't hide there anymore and the communication was really more open and honest, but the real surprise was that it also carried outside the board of directors room. So also the communication to the rest of the company was more open and honest. And what I really like about this example is that like an experiment, a probe, can be as small as just removing a table, which doesn't really cost much money. So I'm not necessarily speaking of, well, we all have to be on the board of directors in order to make such a difference, but more about the thing that you're doing can be really small and it can have a huge impact.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else wants to share any?
I would actually like to ask a question regarding what Jutta just said. That sounds fascinating to me. How was this a more open and honest communication? Give us examples or specifications how you accomplished that, because that sounds really hard to me. So yeah, I would be interested to know more.
So I'm not sure if I can really tell you more. So it's just what they tell, what they said, the difference that made it for them. And what I'm hypothesizing here as well is that I can imagine if they don't have that table in between, it starts already. They are not working so much on other stuff, or like it's almost like a hidden agenda that's going away. And also you see more of the whole person, which also means you cannot you cannot hide so much what you really think or feel.
So
As if
basically,
your own.
I'm sorry, Jutta. So taking away the table is the probes thing that it was in the description.
Well, that was the experiment that they ran based on their reflection that they figured the communication wasn't really so well. And so they had like a what if
I see.
we removed the table.
The table, which is why it's a safe to fail experiment.
Yes.
Like you can remove the table and
Exactly.
nothing would happen.
Yes.
Okay, so that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually why I am fascinated by it, because it doesn't cost much money.
Mhm.
It is a really small step, which can be also rolled back easily. And you can measure and see if things are changing anyway. So, and that's as powerful as a probe can really be, I think.
Mhm.
Does anyone have any question? Yeah.
Yeah. I find this interesting. One of the ways that I've been looking at things is what I call an ACE model, ACE, which stands for acknowledge, commit, and then the E is kind of overloaded for everything. Explore, experiment, evolve, execute, all the things that we want to do. But listening to some of the people talking about the challenges that they've run into organizations, it seems like a lot of times we jump to that E. You know, we're going to come in and we're going to change your stand-ups. We're going to do this. We're going to get these metrics and we're going to do all these things because those are the answers we found in the book. And we oftentimes haven't really even gotten to the point where people have acknowledged that there's a problem and committed to wanting to do something about it. And with your board example, you know, it was nice to see that they were able to acknowledge and articulate the problem and to commit to trying to do things, which that as somebody who's kind of an agent of change seems to be the hardest thing. How can you help people to get to that point to kind of present to them where they do, you know, it's like me putting that mirror on my fridge. So I have to see how fat I am every time I go to the fridge. Like, how can I get that feedback to say, all right, there's a problem here. What are you going to do about it? You know, not just acknowledge, but commit. And then the E's, there's so much work on that. I just haven't seen enough on the first part.
I can't agree more. And I believe we all have fallen into that trap. And it's sometimes in a regular retrospective that we all jump to actions without really understanding why do we think we want to take this action and what are the other threes we are not doing and what's our hypothesis what would happen if we really do that. And this is not often happening. So very often we see like, okay, I don't know, the build failed, so let's do whatever. And it's just, I feel without enough thinking or the way I look at it without real reflection. And then also jumping to the solutions, what I also see, sorry to say that, people like us, sorry to put you all in my same box here, often do. So if a company comes and asks us for help, or if our own company wants to be more agile, or there is this team who doesn't get it or whatever, what often happens is that people like us, we go there and tell them what agile is and how it's working, and we set it up with them. Instead, that we start maybe looking with them, okay, what have you done so far? What was working for you actually? And maybe what would we need to keep and what actually doesn't work at all? And therefore, this is the problem we need to address. So it's the same thing as you say, Dustin. So very often also with Agile, we are coming with a solution, which actually I think in a lot of cases is a good fit. But if people haven't seen the problem yet, and also they haven't seen that, again, I'm saying this, people like us haven't really empathized with the problem, we are not really trustworthy, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we lose credibility, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So also there, we should start with the problem and then also doing like one step after the other.
Yeah.
Incremental.
We have about 12 minutes left. Anyone has any other question?
I have one question. I'm very interested in the sociocracy, just like Adam, which is the reason why I'm here. I'm fascinated by this. I was doing some research on it. It says distinguished by the use of consent rather than majority voting.
Mm-hmm.
Jutta, do you mind telling us a little bit about this? How do you apply your agility? How are you bringing your agility to the sociocracy thing?
Yeah,
this is
sure.
another thing that fascinates me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, sociocracy is mainly based on equivalence. So this is kind of the core value driving everything, equivalence. So this is, I maybe saying it one more time, you have to keep this in the back of your mind for whatever I'm saying. Equivalence is the key driver here. And yeah, the one thing that they are doing is the shared decision making by consent. And I already shared a little bit about that, how this is working, but maybe I should share some more. So the one thing that I said, you ask if anyone has an objection. And this sounds sometimes a little bit like consensus, but it's not a veto. It is like, first of all, if I have an objection about anything, then I say how I think that this decision will put our joint goal at risk. So again, it's not what I favor or not favor, and maybe stressing this a little bit more. Consensus is about agreement. Consent is about acceptance. Or another terminology we use for that or phrase is this in my range of tolerance? Can I live with this? So again, it's not what I really like or whatever, it's can I live with this? And then in order to make it easier for me to live with this is that, for example, we sometimes have this, which goes very much into the probes. Is that decision good enough for now, safe enough to try? And sometimes just saying that helps everyone to overcome and okay, let's try it. And then maybe you want to put in addition a time box on it. What about if we try it for the next 3 months and then we revisit? My range of tolerance gets bigger and bigger and bigger when I hear these things, right? And then maybe another thing, but yeah, that helps me often a lot is for almost, well, yeah, for the decisions we are making, we will never know if it's the best decision. And all too often we have a discussion around that, like what's best? Well, we might know in hindsight, and I doubt even that, because we don't see the alternative which we can compare to. And so beforehand, we never know if it's really best. But what we can tell is it good enough for now? Maybe so, right? So these are all kind of drivers for coming up with the consent decision. And so Sociocracy looks at this by saying consent is governing all decision making, which could also mean we as a team, I just look at the people that I see right now on my Zoom here. If we would be a team, the people I'm seeing, we decide on consent that we ask Adam to make a decision on whatever we need to decide. For example, what kind of library we are using or which framework or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter.
What
so
to have for lunch.
Yeah, yeah, whatever it is. So which means that consent can even govern an autocratic decision making, right? So because we say, Adam, you go and make that decision. We trust you. You make the right choice here for all of us. That's all fine because we know, well, your taste for lunch, or we know you're an expert in those libraries anyway, and that's why. So, and maybe a last word to the consent decision making, and I also look at the time, is that compared to democracy or majority votes, which we, by the way, use all in quotes a lot, I think, in retrospectives as well. So always this dot voting, maybe you think about this next time. This really means we hear everyone's voice, but then we ignore the minority, which is completely different in consent. So I can't be the only one who have that objection. And then again, because the objection is based on how I think it will put our joint goal at risk, everyone is actually embracing the objection because it tells us that we have overlooked something. And we don't want to put the goal at risk. Nobody wants that. And in consensus, I most often feel like, well, then everyone tries to bring me over to the other side. So here's Jutta again, and with her veto. So yeah, what can we do that she, which is different than embracing, welcoming the objection, because we know this way we can make a better decision. Not best, but good enough.
I know there's only 5 minutes, but I might have a tricky question for you. And I'm sorry, Ardita.
Okay.
What if there is no equivalency? You said all of this is based on if there is equivalency. What if there is?
No, all is made for equivalence, which means we also hear the minority voices.
Okay.
And it's a very good question, because that's the other thing that's a very important thing of sociocracy, which is how you build feedback in a structure. And if you think of a hierarchy, so a typical organizational structure, which is a hierarchy, which goes top to bottom, you have assigned managers and all of that. The thing there is that it's exactly one way, and there is no feedback, thinking of it in an agile way. It just goes top to bottom. And now sociocracy says what you actually should do is thinking about having a representative from every level in the organizational structure who is elected to represent their own level, one level higher up. So your team might elect someone who represents the team. Most often it's more like one team. It's kind of the whole level here. Represents the team one level higher up. And because one level higher up, also there, we make the decisions by consent, everyone gets heard. Mm-hmm. So that's called double linking. And also what people say about that, it's kind of feedback that's hardwired in the structure, mm-hmm. and can't be ignored.
Yeah.
And I see 4 minutes.
Yeah, 4 minutes. Do you want to touch on the open space, because we talked about all the other elements, but just very quickly on the open space, how have you used it?
I would love to, really, because there is like one thing that I often find difficult is that there are so many people who know open space. They know open space as a facilitation technique. However, in Bossa Nova, this is not what we understand as using open space for company-wide agility. What we think about this, or how we look at this, is using the principles of open space as the strategy in the company. Meaning, if you now have the facilitation technique in mind, the space is always open. Everyone is always invited to come up with something they're passionate about. And it's always the case that they can find people who are also passionate about that and make it a go. That's why I had this example at the beginning, like the job description. and about innovation. So it's really, well, for example, I might have a cool idea about a product or even just a feature in what we are working on. And I'm completely invited to put this out and find people to make that happen. If I don't find people, so maybe it wasn't such a good idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of what happens in an open space facilitated event, but here it's not an event, it's really, I don't know, maybe even a culture.
Sounds like crowdsourcing. Who is interested?
Yes, really more like that, right? And then with all those principles, whoever is there are the right people and all of that, you know, it's kind of, this is what you bring forward as part of how you organize stuff in your company. And one first start really is that self-selecting teams.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I work on the stuff and with the people I'm passionate about working on and with.
Mm-hmm.
So am I understanding this right? Forgive me, Ardita.
Okay.
Open space is not just physical open space. It
Oh,
also,
not at all, actually.
so then what
Not
is,
at all.
but it sounds like employee engagement.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
more like that. Mhm.
It's a whole technology called on how to actually organize. It's a website that explains a lot about this and a book and everything. And I don't think we have time for this, but it's
Yeah, no, I've never heard of it before, but I'm glad. I'm going to Google the heck out of it now.
Very good. Yeah, yeah. And
Thank you
also
so
like
much.
one of the websites is, I don't have the exact link, but Open Space World is, I think, the kind of one of the best. And by the way, when I tap here in the chat, I have actually also a link where our blog, where we have written up this jointly coming up with your salary decision. So where it's even more precise than how I reported on it. And I see we are on the hour.
Fantastic. Jutta, thanks so much. This was great. The conversation was great. And thanks to everyone for participating and bringing your questions, your experiences. I really enjoyed this. Thank you. The recording will be posted for everyone. And thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. And this will hopefully get our members more involved into these kind of ways of running the organizations.
Thank you, Ardita, for organizing it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely, a pleasure.
Yeah.
Have
Great.
a great day, everyone.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.